Modern Railways. In-depth railway news.
Hello and welcome to the preview of Modern Railways January 2023 edition. It's a bit difficult to come up with anything very cheery just now, what with strikes, cancellations and so on. I've had a few journeys which if I wrote about them, they'd just be too depressing to read. Although there are lots of delays, relatively few of them are down to the trains themselves. So the celebration of golden spanners continues. And on average, fleet reliability continues to improve. As I say, on average. First off, we hear from the power behind the spanner, Roger Ford. Roger is looking forward to the January sales, and he tells me he's bored with his sofa. Here he is to tell you more. Roger.
Well, hello there and welcome to the preview of what's in the next Informed Sources. As we were going to press at the start of December, the Department for Transport finally published the HLOS and SOFA for the next control period starting in 2024. Now, the HLOS is the high-level output specification in which the government says what it wants the railway to provide. The SOFA is a statement of funds available which says how much money Network Rail can spend delivering that and how much subsidy it's going to get. So we've got some numbers to play with, and I get some additional analysis from existing data in my database. And with a bit of help from Network Rail, I've worked out how the numbers are arrived at, and it looks overall as though we're getting about the same amount of money for the next 5 years as for the current 5-year period. I have had ideas from suggestions from informed sources that perhaps I should look more carefully at how this money is being spent in the current control period and how much we are getting for the money. But that's for another column. In addition, Department for Transport has also published a forecast of how much money it intends to spend on supporting the passenger railway. Now, from that, it looks as though the bulk of the cost cutting is going to have to come from the train operators, the people who earn the money, rather than the infrastructure providers, the people who spend it. From that, I move on to the HLOS, which is a pretty thin piece of work. And when you read the magazine, you'll see that I have gone back to HLOS in the past, well, since the very first one, and described what they included. And you'll see that the early versions were quite expansive documents with bold ideas. Some of them were cost-cutting, but some of them were very important. They launched the electrification revolution for a start. But the latest one contains less information than last year's. It's got no reference to Great British Railways, no reference to reform, etc. So I give it a rather rough handling. From there, we move on to Viva Rail, which in November rather, announced that it was going into administration. What happened was that it didn't build enough of its trains, DMUs, converted from London Underground stock, and simply ran out of money. And this was compounded by its founding backer deciding to pull out. Of course, it had already switched from a DMU supplier to battery trains and spent a lot of money and a lot of time on getting its battery trains and its patented fast charging. So whether somebody will buy that and revive the business, we shall see. Of course, it was especially sad because I'm recording this in the week that we heard that Adrian Shooter had died. Adrian was, of course, the founder of Viva Rail, the creator of the Chiltern franchise, which was so successful. But in the tribute I'll be paying to him in next month's, in the February Informed Sources, I'll highlight some of his achievements under British Rail, which were quite considerable. And then I conclude with a report published by Rail Partners, the private sector lobby group. They commissioned a study from consultants Oxera to see whether the dead hand of the Department for Transport was hindering the return of ridership and revenue. And now, as you probably know, at the moment, all revenue from the train operators goes to the Treasury, and the Department for Transport is responsible for costs, which means it's very difficult for people to put in new trains, play with fares and so on. And this study compared the 14 train operators with the open access operators, Hull Trains, Grand Central and Merseyrail. And it showed that there is revenue that, based on the amount of increased revenue they generated, about 10% more than the franchise TOCs, there was quite a bit of money going begging over the next 2 years. However, they also said that the train operators, the TOCs, under the control of the operator of last resort, would have to be relet or given new contracts to achieve the necessary performance in terms of revenue recovery. Well, this didn't seem right to me because, of course, LNER has been way up with the, has led the return to ridership, and you assumed that would probably be reflected in revenue. And I got the figures of their revenue performance, which you'll find in the column, and that is certainly the case. So I think the message of the report is not that you need private sector involvement necessarily, and as I've been saying for a long time, it's a case of structure, not ownership. And what LNER has shown is that if you let the managers at the train companies get on with running the railway instead of micromanaging them from above, they'll earn more money. Anyway, that's everything for this month, and see you again in a month's time.
Thank you, Roger. Now for the editor, Philip Sherratt, to give you a thumb through the rest of the magazine. It's not every day we get a new railway, so there is some more coverage of the Elizabeth line. Philip has had a cab ride, and he'll tell you all about it. Don't think he won't.
Thanks, Ian, and hello everyone, and welcome to our January 2023 preview. So, as usual in our January issue, we have a bit of a rolling stock special, and the main feature, of course, is Roger's annual Golden Spanners review from our awards back at the end of November, and he runs down the reliability of all the fleets across the network with his usual commentary. And the good news is the headline is that reliability overall is improving, but obviously there are lots of variations within that, and Roger delves into all the detail, and all the figures are there for those of you who want them. And alongside that we have reports on the Golden Spanners conference, some interesting presentations there. Ian has his own take, which we'll hear about from him, but this is a sort of a straight write-up of them, if you will. And then alongside that, in our rolling stock special, we got a couple of other features, and one is about wagons, something we rarely write about in Modern Railways. We write lots about locomotives and multiple units, but we write very little about wagons. Well, in this case, two things have come together really to make a really quite interesting story. Porterbrook and GB Rail Freight have recently ordered 2 sets of new wagons from Greenbrier Europe. They've ordered some box wagons and some intermodal twin wagons. Now, one of our correspondents wrote into me because he'd been out to the factory in Romania where the box wagons are being built and offered an article about that. But I contacted Porterbrook and they said, well, actually, there's an interesting story here because those wagons were ordered before the war in Ukraine and before inflation went skyrocketing. And that's obviously presented some challenges, but those challenges have been overcome. And the first box wagons are now in the UK, and the first intermodal wagons as well. So we told both those stories, a bit of an insight into how the wagons are made and how they've overcome those challenges to get them delivered. And also in our rolling stock special, we have a bit of a progress report on Alstom's Aventra EMU platform. Aside from that, we have a series of other features with a little bit of a focus on London, almost by accident. I had the privilege earlier in December of going for a cab ride on the new Elizabeth line, which was absolutely fascinating, and I managed to cover all 3 signalling systems that are being used. The CBTC control in the centre, train protection warning system on the conventional main lines, and ETCS down to Heathrow. So I hope that's an interesting commentary for you on the operational side of the Elizabeth line at the sharp end. One of the Elizabeth line stops is Liverpool Street, and there's a major redevelopment plan been proposed for that by a consortium of various companies, including MTR, which runs the Elizabeth line under the concession from TfL. And so we explain what those plans are. They have provoked quite a bit of controversy already. You can make your own mind up when you read the article. And the third London-related item is a progress update on the Victoria resignaling scheme. This is covering routes across South London in phases, and all being well, by the time this issue reached its date in January, there will have been a big commissioning at Christmas on that. So a bit of a progress report there, but there's still several stages to go, so I'm sure we will return to it again. We also have a bit of a delve into railway finances. Paul Cooper, who wrote for us last month about passenger trends, has done some digging on the financial figures. A lot has been said about the gap between revenue and costs the industry is facing and that challenge. Well, Paul lays that bare, really, and it is very much a challenge that we're going to have to face with costs on the up, but revenue not where it was pre-COVID. Some tough decisions ahead. It's worth also mentioning our headline news article this month. Obviously, we report on the industrial action and the developments with that. But I thought I'd go for a bit of a good news story to lead on our front cover and for our opening news spread. I think it's good news because Grand Union Trains has won access rights for a new open access service between London and South Wales. This is the brainchild of Ian Walmsley, who's behind he's a veteran of open access. He was involved in setting up Grand Central many years ago and then with Alliance Rail, and now is running his own company. And he's got a very curious idea that he should make the interiors attractive and have comfortable seats. Who would have thought of that? Well, we look forward to hearing more about Ian and Grand Union's proposals over time, but I've had a chat with him and got some interesting information, and all being well, that service should start in 2025. But Great Western are already on the blocks with looking at some potential extra services between London and Carmarthen if they get approval for them from both the regulator and the Department for Transport. So an interesting one to watch. There's plenty of other news for you, and so I hope I won't go into any more detail on that, but I hope you'll enjoy reading it all. So as we are at the festive season, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and all the best for the new year. And we'll be back in 2023 with the February issue. So with that, I'll hand back over to Ian.
Thank you, Philip. So now it's on to my Pan Up column, which this month is in 3 parts. And the first one is a sort of sketchbook of the spanners, the bits you don't hear about from the official presentations. Very often, the bits that are most interesting come from the answers to questions, when the speakers go off the script. So I thought that needed a wider audience. Then another conference, no, don't groan. The Rail Forum conference was themed The Depot of the Future, and since it was in Cardiff, the depot in question was Taffs Well, where the Valley Lines, now called the Core Valley Lines, will have their tram train depot. I took a look around the building work, which is basically a lot of mud with a shed in it. The conference, though, showed how we go about designing a new depot, and it couldn't be a lot more different than how we used to do it. Still, a vital part of the Welsh transport system is my old depot, Cardiff Canton, all set to be brought to the 21st century. Obviously, I was interested to hear all about this, since most of the Valley trains are going to Taffs Well, the intercity work has long gone to Landor, and obviously the complications of loco hauled stock are now decades behind us. In my time, I even had a travelling post office set, along with a few buffet cars on the books, all of which absorbed a disproportionate amount of management time. So, now the depot will just have a fleet of Stadler flirts to look after. Easy life? Well, apparently not, but see what you think. Then I'll take a look at Selhurst, invited to see Porterbrook's refurbishing programme on Electrostar's Project Aurora. Well, even I can't make USB points and information systems run to a couple of pages, so there is plenty about the depot itself and how it has coped with the changes of the modern railway. I was impressed by the can-do attitude there, and unlike many places I've been to, it was constantly busy. Great to see some proper work going on, rather than simulations and desktop exercises. Standing on Selhurst station, waiting for my train home, there were Electrostars zooming past as 12-car expresses, while others tootle about stations I would struggle to place on a railway map. A really versatile train with a good passenger environment now being brought up to date. That's the way to do it. See you next month. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
This festive season, Key Publishing's put together a wide range of gift ideas for you and your loved ones. We've got hundreds to choose from in our books and magazines selection. Whether it's aviation, from historic to modern day, classic vehicles, historical events, trains and the railway network, buses and coaches, magazines, and many more. We've got something that's sure to delight the enthusiast in your life. Or why not treat them to a subscription? We publish many magazines, including planes, trains, automobiles, and more, to make every month of their year. From us all, we wish you a happy festive season.